Good afternoon and good evening. And we've now completed the first day of the NHF State of the Science Research Summit. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation today. And I'd also like to thank the organizations who have worked closely with us to endorse the program that we've put together for you, which are those organizations are shown on the right-hand side of this slide. I'd also like to recognize the program support that was provided by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the National Institutes of Health under award number R13HL158209. The content is solely the responsibility of the authors and presenters and does not necessarily represent the official views of the National Institutes of Health. But we're very grateful for the grant funding that we received from NHLBI to support the remote participation groups for this program. So the National Hemophilia Foundation is dedicated to finding cures for inheritable blood disorders and to addressing and preventing the complications of these disorders through research, through education, and through advocacy, enabling people and families to thrive. And I really believe that this NHF State of the Science Research Summit puts us on a clear path to enabling people and families to thrive with all types of blood disorders by helping to shape a national research agenda for the inherited bleeding disorders community. First, I'd like to thank the subject matter experts who participated in all aspects of this work. Without their time and dedication, we would not be in the place where we are today. So a great debt of gratitude is owed to the subject matter experts. To all the working group co-chairs and participants in those working groups who worked tirelessly to develop the research priorities, a thank you to each of you. And of course, to the planning committee, steering committee, and advisory committee members who provided endless hours to this project. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Maria Santaella and Michelle Whitcop for their tireless work to keep all of us on task and really providing expert oversight of this project. So on day one, we talked about hemophilia A and B, and just now we ended with ultra rare inheritable bleeding disorders. There were some interesting analogies that were presented during the day today. We heard about planet asthmatica, as well as analogies of razor blades and handles, soda machines and suits. And I think each of these analogies provide interesting lessons that we can take away in the future as we begin to shape this national research blueprint. I'd like to recognize the remote participation groups as well. Our goal was to increase the participation and amplify the voice of underrepresented communities to ensure that the voice of the patient is present in the virtual meeting setting. And small groups were hosted by chapters and or HTCs. Today, we had several of these groups active and participating, and we're thankful to the insights that they're able to bring to us. These groups were moderated and facilitated, and translation services were provided where needed. They were topic driven, and the groups were described described specific topics that were being discussed, such as hemophilia and the ultra rare bleeding disorders today. So we'll have these remote participation groups continuing throughout the rest of the research summit. So let's talk a little bit about the morning session and hemophilia A and B. I think there were some really important questions that were raised. I can't summarize everything that was discussed in 15 minutes, but I think the highlights for me are shown on this slide. Are the complications of hemophilia different across sex and gender, race and ethnicity, as well as across the lifespan? Is the HTC an ideal structure into which research can be embedded? And how can multidisciplinary care provided by HTCs facilitate the multidisciplinary team science required to answer the most impactful research questions? We hope that the blueprint will help us to begin to address these questions, but more importantly, devise plans to answer them. Other questions include how to incorporate value-based outcomes into clinical research. How can biomarkers that predict disease, complications, and outcomes be developed and integrated into care? And can a long-term longitudinal trial be conducted to address the key questions faced by the aging population as one example of people with hemophilia who have challenges that we're yet to uncover and understand how best to prevent and manage? And I believe the same will be true for those with the rare and ultra-rare bleeding disorders. So what's needed? Patients, those subject matter experts, to participate in research at all levels. Education, health, and research literacy as a gateway to research participation. And of course, access to care and access to research. This afternoon, we ended with ultra-rare inheritable bleeding disorders. There were several observations that I made during this time. While many important research questions for hemophilia A and B stem from a vast existing body of knowledge, the body of knowledge for ultra-rare bleeding disorders needs to be generated essentially from scratch. We don't have the same amount of data and understanding for ultra-rare bleeding disorders as we do for hemophilia A. So we're at an earlier point. We need to build that database. The pathway from symptoms to diagnosis is a critical need, and programs like the Community Voices in Research can really help us understand that patient journey. There is a critical need for infrastructure, including areas such as biospecimen repositories, research funding, clinical trial architecture that are needed for rare bleeding disorders. More observations are that we need to all work together on all aspects of ultra-rare disease. For a very small community, we cannot be fragmented. We must work together. For working together, we will be stronger together. We need to empower the subject matter experts, those patients, to participate in research so that every patient's data matters and every patient's data counts. Can novel diagnostic strategies be implemented to identify people with ultra-rare inherited bleeding disorders? I think these are very important aspects that need to be addressed as we move forward. Some questions that came to me from the ultra-rare session. Can the data collection be decentralized to the patient level and be centralized in the form of big data at the same time? So maybe a little bit more explanation on this. When we talk about decentralized data collection, can we put the data collection into the patient's hands, providing both structured data elements, but more importantly, the opportunities to use things like telehealth to be able to collect data for clinical research? And decentralized big data, when we collect that data in the patient's homes, we need to aggregate that data into a centralized big data repository so that in rare diseases, we can pool that data so that we can see trends more easily. Again, having every patient's data points count is critical. So I asked the question, can data collection be both decentralized and centralized at the same time? In terms of clinical trials, are bespoke clinical trials that Dr. Marks spoke about realistic for the ultra-rare bleeding disorders? Are there the right regulatory pathways to be able to develop these trials and then approve them and then provide access to people with ultra-rare bleeding disorders? Can novel diagnostic strategies be implemented to identify people with ultra-rare inherited bleeding disorders? So what's in store for tomorrow? Tomorrow we have two exciting sessions planned. In the morning, we'll talk about von Willebrand disease, platelet dysfunctions, and other mucocutaneous bleeding disorders. We have Ms. Nicole Scappi, who is an education specialist at the National Hemophilia Foundation and a woman who lives with von Willebrand disease every day. She'll share her lived experience with her disorder with all of us tomorrow. Nicole also had the benefit of being a representative on the von Willebrand disease expert panels that recently developed the guidelines for diagnosis and treatment on behalf of the National Hemophilia Foundation, the World Federation of Hemophilia, the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis, and the American Society of Hematology. Our plenary session will be given by James O'Donnell, Professor of Vascular Biology in the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and Director of the Irish Center for Vascular Biology. I know James has some very interesting things to tell us tomorrow. Our afternoon session will highlight women and girls and persons with the potential for menstruation. This session will begin with Shelley Horowitz, a licensed school counselor and school administrator with over 25 years of experience in the field of education. Ms. Horowitz also lives with an inherited bleeding disorder. She has over 6 generations of hemophilia in her family, and she will be able to share her lived experiences with hemophilia. Wendy Court is a distinguished professor in medicine in the Division of Genetic Medicine and Women's Health Research at the University of Colorado Medical Campus. Dr. Court will give us a stimulating presentation on sex and gender biology and how these issues can impact people with bleeding disorders. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for your attention today and your participation in our first ever National Hemophilia Foundation Research Summit. I think this was a great beginning to our program, and we have a lot in store for the next couple of days for you. So I welcome all of you back tomorrow morning and look forward to stimulated presentations and more robust discussion. Thank you again for your participation.